what we would think of as a book. It's sewn together. It's what we call a book. We call a scroll now. We no longer call scrolls books. Take a look at that book roll. That's a scroll. This is a codex. It was invented. Codexes were invented. Codices is the proper word for it. Were invented AD 100, 200, somewhere in there. Started really being used about 300, in that neighborhood, 400. So this technology here really took off, and it was really complicated to come up with because, they didn't have binding machines, so it was something you had to think about. And so what they would do was they would take a piece of paper, it would be a long piece of paper, or parchment really, like animal skin, shape, that's our animal skins there, and fold it like this. And this was, the codex is a folding of pages and laying them on top of each other and folding them. And they figure out how many do we lay on top of each other, fold them, and then sew to another group that's been laid on top of each other, folded. So you're sewing together groups of parchment that's been folded together. And where that gets complicated is if you want to have page numbers, it's like how do you keep track of that? Because when you fold it up and you have a bunch of papers laying on top of each other, you got to figure out that's going to be 1, that's going to be 2, and then this side's going to be 3 and 4. And then it gets interesting. And each one of these little clumps is called a quire, Q-U-I-R-E. And so they'd sew all these little quires together, and then next thing you know, after $1 million later, almost literally, you'd have a excuse me. Excuse me. Good thing I'm videotaping. Wow, okay. I don't know what just happened. Probably what'd you put in that? Okay.
Allergic to nuts or anything.
Too much stress, that's what it is.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. All right, anyway, I'm back. So, you have all these quires together. That was just a little interlude. Everybody needs a break sometimes. All these quires sewn together. And a big book like this was very large, like this tall. Like if you set it up, this tall, like that thick. So a big book, and imagine all the animals that had to be skinned to make a book like that. It was really expensive. And so only really rich people could have books like this. And Codex Sinaiticus is one of those. Vaticanus is another one they call it. They name them after where they find them. So if they find them in a certain place, like in a library on Mount Sinai, and really wasn't used on Sinai, it just ended up there somehow. Same with the Vatican Library. The Vaticanus was found in the Vatican Library. They were all probably used in the East in big fancy churches back in the 500s, 600s, stuff like that. And there's a theory that says that they go back to the Emperor Constantine, who was interested. Everybody had different Bibles back then. They didn't all have the same books in their Bibles. And because then people in the East had all their parchment rolls, they rolled up, all their loose leaf. And they never quite thought, oh, we gotta decide which books are necessarily there and which ones, because you could exchange. You could pull a roll out and say this one doesn't belong here anymore. And it was just a different way of thinking about books. So Constantine said, I want to print books for everybody. I want 50 of these things. So the story goes. And so they had to decide, oh, this is it? We got to decide which ones are there and which ones aren't, that everybody in the East can agree with, and everybody in the West can agree with, and everybody down in Egypt can agree with, all over the whole place. Regionally, people agreed, but they didn't talk to people over on the other side, So they had to agree on what goes in there, and it was, it's hard to reconstruct events, but this was supposedly one of the things they talked about at the Council of Nicaea was what books go in and which ones go out. Which ones are okay to read, but they're not necessarily in. So it's a little interesting. So this is something you can find online, and I have a snippet from it in your PowerPoint. because it actually it kind of helps to illustrate where you hear about textual variants and things like that. Like in your New American Standard Bible, you might, or other Bibles, you might see a little note at the bottom that says other text, or in you reads this, or most early texts read such and such, or whatever. And this kind of helps explain that. When you actually look at the manuscripts, it makes a lot more sense to me. So we have this here is 1 John 1:4, and let's see. You can actually probably see some of the words that you know. Well, here's Chi right here. See the little hand? I have it right under Chi. See that? They're all caps. Notice that?
And there are no spacing.
No spaces. Yeah, it becomes a little bit of an art form to read this when you're first starting out. Kai koinonia, the common. Koinonia means common. In name meta, I don't know. There's a little abbreviation there. See those little dots and stuff on the end? They had to put little abbreviations and things like that throughout. You see, oh, here we go. Oops, I lost it. It's not the easiest thing to use, and we don't have the internet up here. But if you open to your notes, you'll see this slide here. This is where I want to go. Is right here. And I have three different, well, they're not necessarily, yeah, they're different in different ways. 1 John 1:4 says, these things we are writing, or we are writing to you. It's these things we ourselves are writing. Well, here's what most modern versions have. I'll just kind of give it to you this way. And these things, tauta, that's plural, that's neuter. So we learned tautu or tutu. Remember those things? Tutu, toto, those things. Well, this is the neuter plural of that. And these things, tauta, these, graphomen, we are writing, easy enough, right? Graphomen. Hemes, we talked about this last week. Hemes. Humes is us all. Hemes would be you all. Well, actually, the other way around. Humes is you all. Hemes is us all. Did I say that the first time? Hemes, us all. We ourselves are writing these things. In order that, henna means in order that. We're going to talk about that today. You're going to learn henna. And we might have to revisit that next time because of class attendance. The joy, in order that the joy, hara, hamon, of you all. No, wait, hamon, sorry. I'm thinking ahead to the next one. Of us all. Sorry. Are you confused? Do I need to back up? Okay. And these things we ourselves are writing in order that the joy of us, our joy, and this means may be full. Plerao means to fill up, plero, and this is just a weird tense we haven't learned yet. It basically might be filled up. We're going to learn a little bit about that tense today. Not this precise word. So anyway, you have two we's. We are writing so that our joy might be filled. Got that? Just hang on to that. This is all we. We're writing so that our joy might be filled up. And you can see that in the snippet of the manuscript I put here. There's two, hemes and hamon. And so that's what's in the Codex Sinaiticus. But many older versions use the following text. And these things we are writing to you. See the difference here? Hemes becomes humin here. In order that the joy of us might be full. So that's the same. And then the King James Version was based on this particular Greek text down here. which is, in these things we are writing to you in order that the joy of you might be full, might be filled up. So there's if you go down the line, these two are the same, but this is different from those two. These two are different from that. So you got something a little bit complicated going on. It kind of hurts your head when you start getting into these. It actually gets worse. But what's going on here is that the King James says, in these things we are writing to you in order that your joy might be full. And then you flip over to your New American or your English Standard or whatever, and it says, these things we are writing to you, or sorry, these things we are writing in order that our joy might be full. And you go, well, which is it? And that makes a big difference, because that's kind of like the intent of the letter. How could you mess that up? You know, it's one of those things. Well, it starts right here with this hemes and hemon. And as we've learned, that, well, we'll just give it to you the way that we have it in the small letters. Oops. Yeah, okay. The difference between these two is just the first letter, right? You got to start with the hemes and the hemon. These are, well, right here. If you just flip that over, it's easy to see how you could get confused. Hemon and hemon and humon. Well, when people are copying this stuff, it's a lot to keep track of. And the capital upsilon looks like a Y, and the capital eta looks like an H. But if you write it just so, you could get confused between those two. And so somebody's just copying along one day, and they're just copying, you know, hemon and humon and all this sort of stuff, and they just get these two confused. They write one instead of the other. And so it goes from being, the earlier text would have said us, ours probably. I believe this is probably the earlier text. It goes from saying that to that. And then later they're copying this, and they're saying, this doesn't make any sense with a hemes there. So they fixed that to make sense of the text. And so this one changed first, most likely. Hemon. This one was probably changed first. Somebody made a mistake in copying it. And then they had to change that one to make sense of the text. Because it would have said for a while, these things we are writing in order that we are writing to ourselves or something like that. You know, they're trying to figure this out. In order that your joy might be full. And they say, well, it'll make a lot more sense if it said we are writing to you. So they fixed it to make sense out of it grammatically. We're writing to you in order that your joy might be full. So it started with the simple mixing. You can see how this letter here, it's faint. You can see how that could be mistaken. You're just reading right over it. It's easy to make mistakes when you're just continuously, there's no spaces, there's no nothing. It just wears on the eye after a while. And so mistakes were made, and then they'd have to go back and try to make sense of why doesn't this make sense anymore, so they'd have to change something else somewhere, unaware that they should go back and change something else. You know, so they're changing stuff all the time to make sense out of it. So that's kind of how a lot of these textual variants come up, is a person makes a mistake between a U and an eta, upsilon and an eta. Happens all the time.
But if they made a mistake, I'm just theorizing here. If they made a mistake on the second one, that is, they had the first one, that was the original, you're saying?
I'd say the first one is probably the more original.
Okay. Then the second one, you say they made a mistake making the H or whatever it's called, eta. Is that eta? An upsilon. But they also made it, in the second word on that, they made it, they changed the ending as well as the beginning.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Yeah, this whole word changed. This is probably what was changed first, was hemon to humon. And it's hard to say when did this happen, and so which manuscript comes first in the order. You have to like figure this out.
Yeah, but the first word is changed too.
This one here?
Yeah. So
they probably changed that second to make sense out of that.
Okay.
Out of that right there. There. So this one isn't chronologically second. In other words, this shows up in a lot of manuscripts though. there's a lot of discussion about this particular, as with all of them, there's a lot of discussion about anything. But yeah, this probably changed first, and then this probably changed second.
So you're saying that some of it was error, and then because they made, let's say like an error based on, you know, like they didn't mean to do it, but then they logically or logistically or
then they made a correction.
Made a,
Yeah, there were a lot of corrections made to make sense of little things like this. So, I mean, that explains pretty much 99% of the times when you see, like, other text reads this, or the earlier text reads that, or whatever. If you go back and look at the Greek text, you can say, in looking through capital letters, you know, how could you make sense out of this mistake? You know, and you can usually make sense out of any of them. So anyway, I thought I'd just show you kind of like where a lot of these things go back to. It goes back to stuff like this. You hear, it can make you uncertain if you hear like there's different texts floating around and they all have different words in them, and what's, you know, my goodness. You know, are our New Testament manuscripts reliable, you know? I think Noah actually went to a seminar on that recently. I have to ask him about that. But a lot of it goes back to little things like this. So when you hear people say there's millions of variants or whatever like that in the variations in New Testament manuscripts, you got to think, oh, there's that obscure thing that John was talking about one Thursday morning after the hurricane. Most of it's just like this. I mean, that's most of it right there. And it's like, it will hurt your head. Textual criticism is what it's called. It's its own specialized field. Because you start looking at this stuff, and you're trying to do, it's like genealogy with words. It will hurt your head. It's very difficult to get your mind wrapped around some of this stuff. But it follows in this logical progression. You can say this was easy to change. And I just wanted to open up the window on that a little bit. If we come across a text and different, you know, manuscripts, look it up. If something's giving you trouble, look it up, and if you have questions about it, bring it to me and we can talk about it. You know, so that's that. I thought I'd just show you that because that's something you can't really get. You don't understand even how to start with that because in English, we and you are two different words entirely. You can't understand that by English. But humes and hemes are very similar. Or humon and hamon are very similar in Greek. You just make a mistake on the first letter and you're done. You know? So that's one of most of them, the reason why people have a hard time understanding these is because they're thinking in terms of English. So when you look at it in Greek, it starts to make a little more sense. Because you're trying to make sense of humon and hamon, and then the second one I'll give you this path. It's harder to understand how hemes became human. I'll give you that. But I think that was just a correction after the dream. So. All right. That's unimportant. I thought I'd show you another thing here too. This is a school child's alphabet tablet. See the little holes on top? That's where they would attach these. They'd stack these tablets up. This is from Egypt, the town of Oxyrhynchus. And they'd stack these tablets up, and you could actually bind them. This is probably where the codex was first invented, was with the stacking of these wooden tablets. And then they would eventually say, oh yeah, you could do this on paper too. But this is how school children would write and learn how, and this is the alphabet. And the alphabet doesn't go A, B, C, E, right? Of course it goes A, B, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, zeta. That's like C in there. That's one of those capital, you know, X's. And then it breaks off here, and then it just continues on. And here's a transcription. And then he writes in here, I don't know if his teacher writes this or he writes this, but philopone, which means be diligent, I put it here. Be diligent, stay to the task, you know. So that's written right here. Be diligent, stick to it, keep learning. So he's written his alphabet one time, and already there's the admonition: keep at it. That's kind of cute, right? And then right here in a very faint lettering, it begins again. But I moved the box up a bit far, and it's all crossed out. It's burnt over. I don't know why that's the case, but they learned their alphabets the same way you you learn your alphabet today? Writing it out. Just write it again and again.
I just was just thinking, he probably couldn't read, so why did the teacher write the note, be diligent? I mean, he's writing his alphabet.
It's hard to say.
Maybe mom
It's
had
very
a
common.
paper or something, I don't know. Doesn't that make it this way?
Yeah.
Just interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It might be a word that he wanted the student to learn, and so made him copy it from his hand. You know, like say, I've written this word, it means be diligent. So the student had to look at it and write it out, just an example, perhaps. Yeah, and a lot of these were actually covered with wax. This is one that's etched in, but they were covered with wax. And so they do the alphabet kind of like an etch-a-sketch. And you go back over and melt the wax, and you'd have a new tablet the next day. So this is one that we're fortunate to have that was done with actual ink. And they would write these just over and over and over again. And then there's a couple of interesting stories. There's a book called Gymnastics of the Mind by an author named Raffaele Cribiori. It's one of those books that you think, I'm going to hate this, but it's actually very interesting if you're interested in pedagogy across the millennia. And she collects stories and anecdotes and manuscripts and things like that of what schooling was like back in, roughly the time of Christ. And there's actually a couple stories of a student getting frustrated with the teacher and throwing the wax tablet at the teacher's head and even drawing blood. And the letter, the teacher's writing a letter to the parents saying, your son has thrown a wax tablet at my head and even, or a wooden tablet at my head and even drew blood. And, the parent might have reacted with, you can beat my child all the more, or it might have said, who cares, I'm paying you to teach them, so, what's a little road hazard in the way, We're not really sure what the reply was to that. But it was, being a teacher was interesting back then. You could beat the students. Students were often beaten quite aggressively back then. So the teacher would say, you did poorly on the alphabet. Smack, smack, smack. Very abusive. And that was the incentive. There was no such thing as positive incentive back then. No such thing as a learning environment where you're being brought in as a conversation partner or anything like that. It was all centered around punishment. So we've learned a little bit since then about how to teach, and that perhaps counts for some of the progress of civilization. I don't know. Maybe not. Some people would say, well, maybe if you went back to that, life would be easier. I don't know. I tend not to think so. If you read what it was like, it was just sort of Darwinism in a way. If the beating doesn't help, then you're not fit for learning, basically. So that's I thought that might be a little interesting tidbit into how learning was and how you've been learning. Just you feel very rudimentary. You're like, oh, I feel so dumb, sometimes I'm just learning little bits and pieces, and I'm learning an alphabet all over again. Kids could, well, that's just the way they learned. So you're just learning that. And then they would do these exercises. There's one, I'll move into grammar, I promise here in a minute. I'm giving you a little, curriculum within a curriculum, I guess. It's good to know these things. You've been learning like the accusative case and the dative case and the genitive case and all those sorts of things. So anthropo, anthropon. And you're like, that's so artificial. Well, that's how they would learn it too. There's lists of, instead of the alphabet, a student down the way a little bit might be working on anthropos, anthropo, anthropo, anthropon. They might be working on that, writing that out on the tablet again and again. And when they get that down, when they learn their different cases, they would have to write sentences. This is more of a high school going into college type of a thing. You'd be writing different kinds of sentences. He would say, the teacher would say, Caesar kills the beast. In all of the cases, switch the cases all around for each one of these. So he'd have to write Caesar killed the beast. And then you have to, in the next line, the beast was killed by Caesar, you know, or the beast that Caesar killed. Or you just have to like do variations on that until he figured out how to do all the cases. The beast which was killed by Caesar, and just keep working on different, Caesar brought death to the beast. So you got your dative case there, you know. And they'd have to do these lists, and the teacher would grade them on the use of the cases. I thought about doing that too. And bringing a stick. Do you think that would be good? A rabdos? Yeah. That's the rod of discipline. Rabdos. So I'm thinking about going to the ancient Greek model. You think that's a good idea? To bring the rod of discipline and making you just write stuff, and you're like, I don't know how to do this. Boom! No, that's not good. That's bad.
TV when it doesn't work.
Huh?
It may work. It's like kicking the TV when
No,
it
it's
doesn't
bad.
work. No,
It's
I
bad.
know. I know.
It's fascinating to me to read about this stuff and think this was how the world worked.
Well, even in the 50s when my sister went to school, she went to Catholic school, and if she didn't write correctly, then
The ruler.
none would hit the hand with the ruler. So that's why Catholic school students were always admired for their handwriting. I mean, they had beautiful handwriting, but they were hit a lot.
Well, I know that, yeah, one of my favorite books when I was a kid was about Andrew Jackson. And spankings were very common in school back then. And I liked this one anecdote. The teacher sent him out to get a switch. He had to go pick his own switch off the tree to be smacked with. And so he went out and got a twig and brought it back in.
That's smart.
Future president, you know. Not one of our better ones, but yeah. So then the teacher sent him back out, and he brought something else in, like a big limb or something like that. I don't know. And then he stalled enough that I guess a storm came through, and they all had to evacuate or something like that. I can't remember how the story goes, but he kept stalling. What a smart aleck, you know. So as a kid, I thought, wow, that kid's smart. So anyway, yeah, I used to get the rod of discipline when I was a kid. We were from a sort of a bubble, an old-fashioned bubble, and so our school, in fact, had that. In Texas, it still goes on. Some places.
Whenever I leave and when you're visiting, you can have your child taken away from you if you say.
Yeah, states are different. Yeah, every state is different. Talk about state rights. That's a whole other topic, but that's the way it works. There's no federal law on corporal punishment in states.
What happened to my friend was they had to go through the courts to keep the freedom of the case.
So, yeah, that's quite interesting. That's a whole other topic. I really did not mean to get into the issue of corporal discipline today, I promise you. But it's kind of tied up with the school systems of the time, if you can call them a system. All right, let's do that sheet. Is that so? Why not do that? Do you have it? Does everybody have a copy?
No.
All right. I gave them out last week, but I think I only had enough for, here we go. All right. So, did everybody get a chance to do that? If you had it, did you get a chance to look that over? We had a little hurricane that might have intervened in your, I know that everything was just, for me, everything was just all out of whack this week. You know, just all out of whack. Preparations for Sunday, just got supposed to be preaching this Sunday, and just all out of whack. So anyway, I don't blame you if you didn't have a chance to get this done, but I thought I'd talk it over with you. So in Mark 15, this is somebody saying this, and we got to see if it's true or not. In Mark 15:22, the text says that they brought Jesus to Golgotha, In the Greek, the word for brought is actually karadamos, which means to carry someone against their will. Is that true or false? False. You look it up and it's not there, right? You don't see that word anywhere in there, so it's like, oh, it's easy. Right. So, what's really going on there? Well, how would you explain it? I think I might have just explained it.
I'm confused by your questions of what you wanted, so that's why I had different kinds of answers depending on what mood I was in.
Oh, okay.
And how I interpreted your question.
Uh-huh. You want me to explain what I wanted again? It's just pretend like somebody's saying this and judge whether they're telling you the truth or not.
Well, you know that can't be true because Jesus didn't do that against his will. He chose to do that. So that was,
That's a theological answer, right? We're looking for textual evidence.
okay, see, that's what I'm saying. I'm easily confused because I read things into things that shouldn't be there. So you might need to spell things out very carefully for me.
Well, here's Mark 15:22. It says, Kai pharosin, alton, epiton, golgathon, tapon, ha estin, mether, amenomedon.
Yeah,
Oh,
it had the root word pharaoh.
applying to tapas.
Pharaoh, which means bringer.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's to bear, to bring.
Yeah, the easy answer is,
Would you look for roots?
what's really going on? Well, that word karadamos isn't even in there. You know, that's the easy answer. It's not even there. Yeah, and you're right. So pharosin is there. Pharaoh means I bear, I bring. So if you got that far, then you solved the problem. You're looking at this person like, what are you talking about? I mean, that's why that's kind of your response is, what? You know. Well, that's kind of how. If you're equipped, you can do that. If you're not, you go, huh? That's interesting. The Greek there actually says he took him against his will. Wow, I didn't know that. You know. And next thing you know, you got a whole different idea about what's going on in this text. If you can go look it up and say, that word is not there. What in the world are you talking about? Is there a textual variant? I don't see a textual variant, you know. Yeah.
Just an aside, we were doing word studies yesterday, and one of my ladies went above and beyond what she should have. We're doing Jude, and there's beloved in God the Father, and then Jude writes to the beloved, and beloved's in there, and then to those I love. It just, she looked up every one of those, and some of them are very different. So we had a little discussion on that. And so just a little aside on how the original language can change a meaning, and it was, she came up on her own. So. Anyway.
That wasn't Nicole, was it?
No,
Was
she's
somebody?
not. No, Pat Donakowski.
Okay. Wow, she put in a lot of work on that.
She did Bethmore for years, and she started Precept a couple years ago, and now
She's hooked on going to it. Yeah.
Well, we spent 2.5 hours and 3.5 verses, so we were digging.
No, that's good. You gotta dig. It's helpful. So anyway.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My internet was down, so I didn't have a Google Translator, but I looked in the Strong's Dictionary and didn't see that word at all. Does it exist?
No.
Does it work? Okay.
I made it up.
Oh, okay.
But this is not at all uncommon that a preacher will have said something in 1920 and at some evangelistic meeting, and there were 5 pastors there, and the 5 pastors never looked it up, and they went home and preached it to their churches. And in that church, there were 18 Sunday school teachers, and those 18 Sunday school teachers just said it for the next 50 years. And that happens all the time. You know, you're looking at me, Pat, like, really? Yeah, there's stuff that just gets in the woodwork.
Oh, I don't understand, I really don't understand.
I made this up.
You made the word up.
You weren't here last week, so
No.
get that.
What's
So
really
I-
going on is the word is not in the.
Right, it's not there, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't have known it. Well, I guess we could look at it in the dictionary
We're
and
yeah, we're
see
supposed
that
to-
it
But we
couldn't
would know that it
exist or we
wasn't in the
couldn't
verse.
find it.
Yeah, we're supposed to use our New Testament Greek and see what it says.
Okay,
And then
then
we would've
this was
seen that it wasn't
an
there.
exercise in looking at the particular.
Yeah, let's read the back. Let's back up. Is that so? Question mark. This week, complete the following 4 questions. You may use any Greek or English resources you want. Don't make this too complicated. They're simply asking you to read what is in the Greek text and identify And to identify a Greek ending you already know, or to identify a Greek ending, let's put it that way. So the point is with this is to say, pretend like somebody says this. Is it true or not? So true or false? False. What's really going on in the text? Well, easy answer is that word's not there. I'm done. Slam it. If you went over and said, well, I want to see if that word's actually in the dictionary, that's going above and beyond right there. You're already like getting ready to bury their hypothesis under 6 feet. So it's you know, the simple answer is that word is not there. It just isn't there. And then yeah, you could say, well, paradomos, that's not even a word. You know, yeah, I made that up. But I'm trying to simulate what actually happens. Words do get made up, or meanings for words do get made up over time. And you actually just got to go back and reference things. Say, you know what? I've heard this all my life, but I'm really not seeing it now. I'm not comfortable with that anymore. So it's just an exercise in thinking for yourself, Pat. So in 1 John 2:5, the phrase translated "we know" is gnosko. And I put the transliteration because most of the time you'll see this in transliteration in English letters. You hear this. Which literally means you all know. Now this one you might not even have had to look up. And it's good to look it up and make sure that, so let's do that. 1 John 2:5, let's see what's there. So, hasta on, we'll talk about on in a little bit. Tere, autu, ton logon, let's see. Okay, here we go. Down here, the highlighted section. In tuto gnoskumen, hanti and alto esmen. So gnoskumen is there, right? So they got that right. Whoever they are, it's really me, but does well they misspelled this here, gnoskomen and gnoskomen. Gnoskomen. Well, we'll talk about that later today, actually, what that is. Are you interested in why that's a long O? Yeah, you probably wouldn't have noticed. I didn't expect it to. Anybody know why that's a long O? Okay. We'll it's just a misspelling, okay? But there's something that goes on with those long letters and many verbs. Okay, which literally means you all know. Now we've been going over these paradigms again and again and again, right? O, ace, a, amen, eta, usi, right? Grapho, graphes, graphe, grapholin, graphusi. Does omen mean you all?
No.
Okay, so is this true or false?